Please, get me away from this wedding. You will marry Gerald today.
Nobody gets to buy another human being.
Then watch me walk away.
You watched me struggle while hiding all this?
I feared you would only want my money.
You lied while calling it protection.
I was terrified of losing you. I won that contract without your help.
I know. You earned every inch yourself.
Why should I trust you again?
Don't need me. Choose me.
She was standing in the church bathroom in a $4,000 dress she hadn't chosen, listening to the organ music swell through the walls when she understood that her mother had sold her. Not metaphorically. Her mother had counted the money Gerald Ashby's estate attorney deposited 3 weeks earlier, paid the back taxes on the family home, settled the medical debt from her father's last hospitalization, and then told Cora calmly, over coffee, that Gerald was a good man, and the wedding was in 3 weeks. Outside the narrow bathroom window, a construction crew was working the sidewalk. One of them looked up and met her eyes. Cora picked up the hem of her dress, walked to the side door, and didn't stop. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 6 weeks earlier, the worst thing Cora Wilder could imagine was losing her job. She had managed a marketing coordinator business for 11 months before the company downsized. 4 months of applications later, she was still sleeping in her childhood bedroom, eating her mother's food, and trying not to count the weeks. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself a lot of things. Patricia Wilder had made the introduction to Gerald Ashby casually, a charity dinner, a man who knew the right people, someone who admired Cora's composure from across the room. Cora had noticed the introduction was careful. Her mother was always careful when she was arranging something. By the time Cora understood what had been arranged, the deposit had already cleared. She did not scream. She did not cry in front of Patricia. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed for 2 hours with her hands in her lap, and then she said nothing for 3 weeks and made herself a plan that ended at the side door of a church. The construction crew had been working the sidewalk in front of St. Ambrose for 4 days. She had watched them from the upstairs window during rehearsal, carrying the same useless anxiety she'd been carrying all week. One of them had looked up then, too, dark eyes, unhurried. He hadn't looked away first. She didn't think about that when she walked out the side door. She was only thinking about not stopping. She made it half a block before she heard her mother calling her name from the church entrance. Then Gerald's estate attorney, a man with a thin voice and fast footsteps. She kept walking. She turned the corner and nearly ran into the construction foreman coming back from the equipment truck with a set of plans rolled under one arm. He stopped. He looked at her, at the dress, at the direction she'd come from, at the fact that she was not stopping, and he didn't say anything foolish like, "Are you all right?" "They're behind me," Cora said. Coming around the corner in about 30 seconds, he turned his head to look. Then he stepped to the side and stood between her and the corner of the building, arms loose at his sides, the rolled plans still tucked under one arm. Patricia came around the corner first, followed by the attorney and one of Gerald's men. She stopped when she saw the construction worker standing there, her daughter just behind his shoulder. "Excuse me," Patricia said, with the tone she used on service people. "This doesn't concern you. She said she's choosing not to go," he said. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't raise his voice at all. "A person isn't a transaction." "She signed, Day," the attorney started. "She signed nothing. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." He looked back at Cora once, briefly. "You can leave whenever you're ready." They stood there for a moment, Patricia calculating, Gerald's man uncertain, and then they retreated. Not without threat. Her mother said something about consequences, about what this family needed, about debt. Cora didn't answer any of it. When they were gone, the man said, "Anywhere you need to go?" "I don't have anywhere to go," she said honestly. His name was Daniel Mercer. He said it simply, no embellishment. He asked her exactly one question about her situation. Was she safe? And when she said not entirely, he didn't pile on questions or sympathy. He told her he had a situation of his own that might intersect with hers if she was willing to hear it. His grandmother had given him an ultimatum. marry in the next 3 months, or she would begin selecting a wife herself. Daniel had reached the age where he understood his grandmother was not joking. He needed a real legal marriage, brief by agreement, managed quietly. She needed a place to be safe while she found her footing. Neither of them was asking for anything more than that. Separate rooms, he said. Independent lives. Temporary. How long? Long enough for you to not need it anymore. Cora looked at him for a moment. She thought about the alternative, which was going back or starting from nothing with $34 in her account. I want it in writing, she said. He nodded. My attorney can have it ready by noon. They were married at the courthouse at 3:15 that afternoon, 2 witnesses from the clerk's office, no ceremony. She signed her name next to his on a form she actually read all the way through. She did not feel relieved. She felt like she had made a decision, which was different from feeling good about it. That evening, back at his house, a clean, quiet place with nothing showy and nothing cheap, she unpacked the one bag she'd brought and sat on the edge of the guest room bed. Through the wall, she could hear Daniel on the phone in the hallway. She was not trying to listen, but his voice had changed. The easy, unhurried tone from the construction site was gone. What was there instead was clipped, authoritative. The voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. Freeze the Heartland contract, he said. I want to review the liability exposure before anything moves forward. No, all of it. I'll look at it myself. Cora sat in the dark and turned the words over in her mind. Construction foremen didn't freeze contracts. They didn't review liability exposure. They didn't speak to whoever was on the other end of that call in that particular tone. She put the thought away and went to sleep. She had enough to manage without borrowing problems. But she filed it. The way he'd said it. The way it sounded like a decision no one was going to argue with. The written agreement was 12 pages long, which surprised her. She had expected something simpler, a page, maybe 2, setting out the basics. Instead, Marcus Webb, Daniel's attorney, had produced a document that covered residency terms, financial independence clauses, exit procedures, confidentiality provisions, and what he described as good faith obligations for both parties. Cora read every word twice and asked 2 questions. Webb answered them clearly and without condescension. She signed. Daniel gave her a copy without being asked. The house was in a quiet part of the city. Older construction, well-maintained, a street where nobody's yard had been recently landscaped to impress anyone. Inside, it was orderly without being sterile. Books on the shelves were the kind that had been read. The kitchen had a good stovetop and nothing decorative. There was nothing obviously expensive, but nothing was cheap either. The guest room had its own bathroom, a window facing east, and a closet large enough for what she'd brought. The rules they established were simple in practice. Separate rooms, always. No bringing other people home without notice. No financial entanglement. She would contribute her share to household expenses once she was employed, at a rate they agreed on in the document. He would not attempt to manage, advise, or direct her choices. She would extend him the same. She began applying for jobs on her second full day in the house. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and worked from 7 in the morning until past midnight, rebuilding cover letters, updating her portfolio, researching companies whose culture she could actually tolerate. She applied to 31 positions in the first week. She heard back from 4. Daniel didn't offer to help. He didn't ask how it was going. He noticed her working late one evening and set a glass of water on the table without a word, which she accepted without making it into anything. He ate badly when left to himself. She discovered this because the refrigerator contained exactly 3 things when she arrived, one of which was expired. She cooked on her 3rd evening, not as a gesture, but because she was hungry, and cooking for 1 and cooking for 2 is the same amount of work. He ate what she made without ceremony and did the dishes afterward. It wasn't warmth, exactly. But it wasn't cold either. It was 2 people being careful with each other, which she appreciated more than she would have expected. On her 6th day, she came into the kitchen to refill her coffee and found a business card on the counter near the phone. She hadn't put it there. It must have been left from a call the evening before. Daniel had stepped out of the room to take it and come back 15 minutes later, quieter than before. The card read, Marcus Webb, Webb and Associates, Corporate Counsel Mergers, Acquisitions, and Private Equity. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it back where it was and refilled her coffee. She told herself it was probably from a prior contractor dispute. People in construction dealt with legal complexity all the time. But mergers and acquisitions wasn't the practice area of someone handling a job site injury claim. Mergers and acquisitions was the practice area of someone who bought and sold companies. She filed the thought and went back to her laptop. On her 9th day, she got a call from Aldridge Marketing Group. The recruiter said she had been shortlisted. 12,000 applicants, 30 positions. They wanted her in for a first-round interview Thursday morning. She came back into the kitchen and stood for a moment, processing it. Daniel was at the counter, pouring coffee. He looked up when she came in. She told him she'd gotten the call. Something moved across his face. She caught it for a fraction of a second before he looked away, back at his coffee cup. It wasn't surprise. It was something more deliberate than surprise, like someone catching a reaction and setting it aside. Thursday, she said, at 10. Congratulations, he said, and he meant it, in the understated way that made her uncertain whether he was actually pleased or simply well-mannered. She didn't know which it was. She wasn't sure yet how well she could read him, but she was paying attention. The interview was at a glass-fronted building 20 minutes by bus from the house. She wore the best thing she'd brought with her, a slate gray blazer and dark slacks, and took notes on what she observed. In the lobby, the behavior of the staff, the way the receptionist answered the phone. Details mattered. She had always paid attention to details. The panel was 3 people. She answered their questions directly and without overselling. She acknowledged a gap in her recent employment and framed it accurately. At the end, they thanked her and told her they'd be in touch within a week. She took the bus home. Daniel was still on site when she got back, but he came in about an hour after she did, set his keys on the hook and asked how it went. She said it went well. He said good and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and that was the entire conversation. She found herself thinking about the business card again that evening while she was building a case study for another application. Marcus Webb. Corporate Counsel. Mergers and acquisitions. She didn't search for him. Not yet. She wasn't sure what she was looking for or what she would do with what she found, but she kept the thought where she could reach it. The call came 5 days later. She had been shortlisted again and was moving to final round. The coordinator said the decision would be made by end of week and asked if Cora was still interested. She said yes, she was still interested, and after she hung up, she sat very still for a moment in the guest room with the phone in her hand. Then she went to the kitchen and started making dinner and did not say anything about it until Daniel came home and asked what was for dinner. And she told him that, and told him she'd made it to final round at Aldridge at the same time, in the same casual tone, so neither piece of information seemed like a bigger deal than the other. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They have a good reputation. You know the company?" "I know most of the firms in this market," he said. She let that go. Most construction foremen didn't track marketing firms, but she let it go. She got the offer 3 days later. Lead analyst candidate pool, 31 people. She got it. She was in the kitchen when the email came in. She read it twice, then looked up. Daniel was reading something at the counter. She told him. He looked up at her, fully, not the way you look at someone when you're being polite, but the way you look at someone when you're actually seeing them. "You'll take it," he said. It wasn't a question. "First day is Monday," she said. He nodded once and went back to reading. That was the end of the conversation. But she noticed he came home earlier that night than he usually did. And there was something in the house that evening. Not celebration. Nothing as obvious as that. Just a slight shift in the air. Like something had been decided. She didn't know what to make of that. But she filed it where she could reach it. Helen Crane had the office at the end of the hall and the manner of someone who expected to be consulted before decisions were made in her general direction. She was polished in the way that required effort and was designed to signal that the effort had not been required. Good hair, better shoes, a particular brand of pleasant expression that carried no warmth. She introduced herself to Cora on her first morning as your direct supervisor for the onboarding period, and then spent 4 minutes explaining the importance of understanding your place in a structure before trying to contribute to it. Cora thanked her and went to her desk. The work she was assigned in her first 2 weeks was the least interesting work in the department: formatting archival reports, pulling competitor data into existing templates, updating a vendor contact sheet that hadn't been touched in 18 months. She did everything asked of her without complaint and without the visible resentment that would have given Helen something to address. She worked quickly and accurately. She was always first in and rarely left before Helen did. She observed everything. The department worked on client accounts in marketing strategy and campaign development. The most interesting project in the queue was an affordable housing pitch, a city-adjacent development group looking for a comprehensive marketing approach to a low-income residential complex they were planning. The brief was thin. The budget was real. The pitch had been sitting in the queue for 6 days because nobody had taken ownership. Cora took a copy of the brief home on a Thursday evening. She sat at the kitchen table after dinner and worked through the problem properly, from the ground up, the way she would have approached it if the account had been hers. She identified a gap that wasn't in the brief at all. The development's affordability claims would be accurate, but meaningless to tenants who worked jobs accessible only by car, in a city where sus routes didn't connect to the proposed site. Lower rent was theoretical if transportation costs consumed the savings. She built an analysis of the transit infrastructure around the proposed development, existing routes, ridership data, the cost differential for a resident who needed a car versus one who had bus access within a quarter mile. Then she mapped a proposal. Locate the first development phase on an existing bus corridor and include employer-backed shuttle provisions in the tenant agreement template. It took her until past 11. She brought the printed analysis to Helen's desk the next morning before anyone else arrived and set it on top of the inbox without fanfare. Helen glanced at it. "I'll keep it in mind," she said without looking up. Daniel had driven her to the office her first day. In his truck, concrete dust still on the dashboard, a work order clipped to the sun visor. She had taken the bus every day since. That Thursday evening, she came home to find him on the phone in the kitchen. She could hear pieces of the conversation from the hallway as she hung up her jacket. "The second phase parcels are already zoned. The city council vote is the only variable left." A pause. "No, it won't matter. We hold the options either way. Let them vote." Another pause. "I'm not moving the capital position before the vote. That's a decision we don't rush." She came into the kitchen. He wrapped up the call with a quick, "I'll look at it tomorrow," and set his phone down. "What project?" she asked, not with urgency, just conversation. "Drainage," he said. She nodded and went to the refrigerator to see what they had for dinner. Drainage. She turned the word over while she made a salad. Drainage didn't involve zoned parcels or city council votes or capital positions held against a political outcome. That was land development. That was someone with options on property, and the patience to wait for a vote to go the right way. But she didn't push it. She didn't know enough yet, and it was possible she was misreading a conversation she'd caught 30 seconds of. The next morning, she arrived at Aldridge to find the affordable housing account had been assigned to Helen for the pitch presentation that afternoon. Cora's analysis, restructured into a cleaner slide format, with the section headers rearranged, and a new title, was the first slide in the deck. Her name was not on it. She watched the presentation from the back of the conference room. Helen moved through the transport integration argument with the fluency of someone who had spent time with it, which she had not. The executives responded well. One of them asked where the transit data had come from. "Departmental research," Helen said. "My team worked up the methodology." Cora said nothing. She went back to her desk. She opened a new folder on her laptop and began saving files with timestamps, the original analysis, the email showing when she'd delivered it to Helen's inbox, the version metadata showing the document's creation date. She was not angry yet. She was being careful. That afternoon, one of the other junior analysts, a man named James, who sat 2 desks away and made a point of knowing where all the exits were, caught her eye as she was building a case study on an unrelated account. He leaned over. "The transport cost slide," he said quietly. "Did you write that?" "Departmental research," she said, echoing Helen's phrasing. James looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Right," and went back to his work. But he nodded slightly as he turned away, which told her everything she needed to know about whether she was the only person in the room who had noticed. She drove home that evening in a company rideshare. Helen's department had a petty cash account for transport reimbursement, which she'd been told about but never used until now. She looked out the window at the city moving past and thought about her options. She could raise it. She could say something to Helen directly, or to her manager above Helen, or to HR. She had the timestamps. She had the metadata. She could make a case, but she was still in her probationary period. She had been at the company for 3 weeks. Nobody there knew her from anything except those 3 weeks. And 3 weeks of good work did not yet outweigh 3 weeks of nothing in someone else's file. She would wait. She would build more. She would keep her documentation clean. She was still in that calculation when the rideshare pulled up to the house, and she got out and found Daniel coming out the front door at the same time, in work gear, heading somewhere. He paused on the steps. "You eaten?" he asked. "Not yet. There's pasta in the pot," he said. "I'll be back late." He went to his truck and drove off. She stood on the front walk for a moment and then went inside and ate the pasta he'd made, and sat alone at the kitchen table with her documentation folder open on the laptop, and her analysis of Helen's presentation notes beside it. And she thought about the capital position and the city council vote and the zoning parcels, and how none of those words belonged in the vocabulary of someone who worked a construction site. She ate. She worked. She filed everything carefully. She was building a case, even if she wasn't entirely sure yet which case it was. The car arrived at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, a private sedan, not a taxi, with a uniformed driver who got out and opened the rear door, with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was an ordinary Tuesday. The woman who stepped out was in her 70s, small and upright, wearing a coat that had not come off a rack. She looked at the house with an expression that was taking inventory, not judging it, and then walked to the front door and rang the bell as if she owned the schedule of the entire day. Cora answered, because Daniel was on site. "You must be Cora," the woman said, and stepped inside with the same unhurried certainty with which she'd gotten out of the car. "I'm Eleanor. I'm Daniel's grandmother. He wasn't expecting me." She said this last part with a tone that made clear she was aware of it and found it entirely reasonable. Eleanor moved through the house with the attention of someone accustomed to reading rooms. She looked at what was on the shelves, at the kitchen table where Cora's laptop was open, at the second coffee cup in the drying rack. She made no comment on any of it. "Sit down," she told Cora, taking a seat herself at the kitchen table. "Is there coffee?" Cora made coffee. Eleanor watched her do it and said nothing until the cups were on the table between them. "He told me about the arrangement," Eleanor said. "Not the details." "Enough. What did he tell you?" "That you needed a safe place and he needed a real marriage on paper," she looked at Cora steadily. "Are you safe?" "Yes," Cora said. "And the rest of it? I have a job. I'm managing." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if checking something off a list. "He said you were sharp." He didn't say much else, but that's not unusual for him. They talked for nearly an hour, or rather Eleanor asked questions and Cora answered them honestly, which amounted to the same thing. Eleanor had a directness that wasn't unkind. She simply didn't traffic in indirection. She asked about Cora's background, her degree, the job at Aldridge, how she was finding the city. She did not ask anything about the wedding Cora had left, though she clearly knew about it. That restraint, Cora thought, was its own form of consideration. When Daniel came home earlier than usual, having been called or having seen the car, she wasn't sure which. Eleanor stood up and greeted him with the specific affection of a person who loves someone and is regularly exasperated by them. "You could have told me you'd arrived," he said. "I did tell you. I said this week." She turned to Cora. "Before I forget." She reached into her bag, a structured leather bag that was neither new nor inexpensive, and produced a small velvet pouch. She held it out to Cora. Inside were 2 earrings, oval stones, clear and deep, in a platinum setting. Cora recognized them as real without being able to name what kind of real. "I can't accept these," Cora said. "You accepted my grandson," Eleanor said. "These are less troublesome." She said it with such finality that arguing felt like the more awkward option. Cora accepted the earrings. She thanked Eleanor and put them back in the pouch and set it on the counter. Eleanor stayed for another 30 minutes, during which Daniel made tea, and Eleanor held court on several subjects Cora wasn't entirely following. At one point, Eleanor told Daniel to see her to the car, and the 2 of them stepped outside. Through the kitchen window, Cora could see them standing on the front walk, Eleanor speaking, Daniel listening with his arms crossed, his expression carefully composed. Eleanor made a gesture that could have meant tell her or stop waiting. Daniel said something brief. Eleanor did not look satisfied. After Eleanor's driver pulled away, Daniel came back inside. He didn't volunteer what they'd discussed. Cora didn't ask. The next morning at Aldridge, she discovered that the affordable housing pitch had been awarded to a client and that Helen had been CC'd on the congratulatory email from the account director as the lead strategist. There was no mention of Cora. She kept working. She kept building her files. On Wednesday afternoon, a moment she almost missed. Eleanor's driver had been waiting by the car when Cora walked out to the street for a lunch break. He was sitting in the driver's seat with the window cracked, phone in hand. A business magazine was open on his screen. She caught it as she passed. A spread with a photograph of a man in a suit, sitting in a large office, the kind of photograph that ran with a profile piece. The man's face was familiar in a way she couldn't place, the jaw, the angle. The driver shifted the phone as she passed. The screen went dark. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment after she'd gone another few steps. The face was familiar. She had seen it recently, and not in a professional context. She turned it over while she walked, but she couldn't land on where. It was still bothering her when she came back to her desk after lunch and found a message from Helen. "Come see me at 4. She went. Helen's office was orderly in a way that communicated control. Helen sat behind her desk and clasped her hands and told Cora pleasantly that some friction had come up around the housing pitch analysis, and she wanted to make sure they were aligned going forward. Cora said nothing. She waited. Helen said that junior analysts sometimes confused their supporting work with ownership of a project. She said that department contributions were just that, departmental, and that a name wasn't required on every piece of research for the work to be valued. She said it in the tone of someone explaining a reasonable policy to a person who had not yet been around long enough to understand how things worked. Then she leaned forward slightly. "A woman married to a construction worker can't afford to make enemies in this department," she said. "I'd be careful about who you think you are here." Cora looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for the meeting," she said, and stood up and went back to her desk. She was not surprised, but it clarified something. Helen hadn't just taken her work. She'd noticed Cora noticing, and she was drawing a line before any challenge could be mounted, which meant the documentation mattered more now. She stayed 2 hours past close that evening, building a clean, time-stamped archive, every original file, every email, every version she'd created, with the metadata attached. Then she went home, and she went to the velvet pouch on the counter, and she opened it and looked at the earrings for a long time. She thought about Eleanor's driver, the magazine photograph, the familiar jaw in an unfamiliar suit. She turned the earrings over in her palm. Tomorrow, she decided. She would search it tomorrow. Gerald Ashby appeared in the Aldridge Marketing Group lobby on a Thursday morning, which told her he'd had her tracked. He was impeccably dressed. He was always impeccably dressed, which she had once noticed as a quality and had since come to understand was just a feature of his wealth. The way good leather and good tailoring were simply part of the maintenance of a certain kind of life. He was standing near the reception desk when she came in, and he saw her before she saw him, which also felt like something he'd arranged. "Cora," he said, as if they were running into each other at a mutual acquaintance's dinner party. "You look well." She stopped. She looked at him. She said nothing. "I wanted to see how you were managing," he said. I've heard about he paused, choosing his word, arrangement. I'm managing fine. Of course. He smiled. It was a practiced smile, the smile of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the outcome was already decided. I wanted you to know that I bear no ill will. These things sometimes don't go as planned. They went exactly as I planned, she said. I planned to leave. Something shifted briefly in his expression. The man you married, he said. He's not, Cora. He can't offer you what you need. I've looked into him. He's a construction foreman. I know what he is, she said. You deserve a real life. I have one. She turned to the reception desk and asked them to call security, politely, for an escort. Gerald left without being made to, which was the kind of exit a man like him would always prefer. She watched him go through the glass doors and then went to her desk and sat down, and was still for about 30 seconds, which was all she allowed herself. Her mother called that evening. She had been waiting for it. Patricia's opening was calibrated. Concern without accusation, a maternal register designed to induce guilt without providing anything specific to argue against. She talked about the family's situation, about what they had needed and what Cora had refused to understand, about how a mother's decisions were sometimes made from love, even when they looked like something else. You sold me, Cora said when Patricia paused. You counted the money and you decided that was acceptable. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I'm not going to pretend it was something else, Cora. I'm going to go now, she said. I'll call you when I have something different to say. She hung up. She sat for a while at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her. Daniel wasn't home yet. The house was quiet. She felt the shape of what had just happened. Not devastated, not triumphant, just clear. That was progress. The documentation work at Aldridge was getting more complex. She was building a file on every project in the department, not obsessively, not in a way anyone would notice, but thoroughly. Timestamps on everything. She had started keeping a private log of what she observed, which accounts went to whom, which presentations drew on research she had contributed, how Helen framed departmental work in different meetings. It was methodical. It was exactly the kind of thing she was good at. A week after Gerald's visit, a man appeared at the house. She was in the kitchen when the knock came. She answered the door. The man was in his late 20s, in a suit that was considerably more formal than what you wore to someone's front door, carrying a slim briefcase. He was coming to see Daniel, he said, about some documents that required a signature. She told him Daniel wasn't home yet and offered to take a message. The man seemed to consider something for a moment. He said he could wait, if that was all right. He was very polite. Cora stepped back and let him into the entryway. When Daniel came in 20 minutes later, she was in the kitchen and the man was waiting in the hall. She heard Daniel's voice change the moment he recognized the visitor. It flattened, became precise, professional. He spoke quietly. He took the briefcase into the other room. She heard a door close. She did not go looking for what was in the briefcase. She was not that kind of person. But she had seen the man's posture when she'd opened the door. She'd seen it again when Daniel appeared at the end of the hall. It was not the posture of someone visiting his employer's house, which would have been comfortable. It was the posture of someone visiting his principal. Careful, slightly deferential. The kind of deference you extend to someone who signs things. After the man left, she heard Daniel on the phone for several minutes. The tone was the same one she'd heard through the door that first night, clipped, authoritative, ending the call with a decision rather than a question. She waited until he came into the kitchen. She didn't ask about the man directly. She said instead that she'd found something on the counter last week, a folder. It had been left by accident. She described the safety inspection report and the line at the bottom, D. Mercer, project owner. She said the company named was Mercer Capital and Construction. Daniel was quiet. She asked what that company was. He said it was a firm he had an interest in. He said it casually, like it was a minor detail. An interest, she repeated. Yes. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to her laptop right there at the kitchen table and typed Mercer Capital and Construction into the search bar. The first result loaded. It was a business news brief from 6 months ago. The headline read, Mercer Capital closes $400 million mixed-use development fund. There was a stock photo of a commercial building. She scrolled down. There was a company profile link. She clicked it. The page had a leadership section. There was a photograph, a professional headshot, the same angle as the magazine photo she'd glimpsed on Eleanor's driver's phone, the same jaw. The caption read, "Daniel Mercer, Chief Executive Officer." She looked at the screen for a long time. She looked up at him. He was still in the kitchen. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not guilty, not defiant, but careful. Like someone waiting to understand what kind of moment this was going to be. She closed the laptop. "We can talk about it later," she said, which was not what either of them expected her to say. She went to her room and sat on the bed with her hands in her lap. She heard him in the kitchen for a while, the sound of a cabinet, the tap running. Then the house went quiet. She sat there and thought about every morning she'd spent calculating bus times, every cover letter she'd built from scratch because she had $34 in her account, every evening she'd cooked dinner so the food wouldn't go to waste. She thought about the safety report, the corporate attorney, the suited visitor, the phone calls, the way people deferred to him. She thought about the earrings on the counter insured for. She didn't yet know for how much, but she could guess now. She did not sleep easily, but she kept her door closed and her voice even, and she did not say anything she wasn't ready to say yet. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would say all of it. The HR meeting was at 9 in the morning, which told her Helen had booked it, before coming in, which told her it had been planned. The HR coordinator, a careful woman named Diane, explained that a formal complaint had been filed by a senior manager regarding the integrity of research submitted under Cora's name. The specific allegation: that competitor data in the housing analysis had been selectively omitted to make the transport integration argument appear stronger than the underlying evidence supported. Cora asked to see the complaint. Diane said that wasn't standard practice in an early-stage review. Cora said she'd like to address the allegation directly, if possible. She opened her laptop and pulled up the original housing analysis file, creation timestamp 11:17 p.m., on the Thursday evening she'd worked late. She pulled up the email to Helen's inbox, sent at 7:46 the following morning, before Helen arrived. She pulled up the version history, which showed no modifications after the initial save, and the metadata, which showed the document had been authored and last edited by one account with her login credentials. She laid it out simply and without emphasis. The data sources were all cited in the appendix. She offered to pull the raw data sets and match them to the slides Helen had presented, line by line. Diane looked at her for a long moment. "I'll need to review this," she said. "Take your time," Cora said. She provided copies of everything and saved them to a shared folder she created in the HR system with Diane's access. Then she went back to her desk and kept working. She was eating lunch at her desk when her phone buzzed, Eleanor calling to see if she was free for lunch that week. They settled on the following Thursday. The restaurant Eleanor had in mind was a private members club in a neighborhood where the buildings had names, not addresses. The coat check attendant knew Eleanor by name. The table was in a quiet corner and the menu had no prices, which Cora had heard of but never personally encountered. Eleanor asked her how things were. At work, complicated, Cora said. At home, also complicated. Eleanor looked at her with that precise attention she'd brought into the house on the Tuesday she'd arrived. "He hasn't told you. I found some things on my own and—" "I haven't said much yet." Cora paused. "I wanted to be sure of what I was saying before I said it." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "He's been afraid for a long time," she said. "He'll tell you that differently. He'll call it caution or discretion, but it's fears." Senior. She sipped her water. "The earrings, by the way. You should know they're insured for $38,000. Cora set down her fork. "I told you because you should know what you have," Eleanor said. "Not to make a point of it, just because you should know." Cora looked at the table. $38,000 for a casual Tuesday visit. From a woman who described giving them as less troublesome than he is, they talked about other things through the rest of lunch. When they parted outside, Eleanor put a hand on Cora's arm briefly. "Ask him what he's afraid of," she said. "Not what he's hiding, what he's afraid of. Those are different questions. Cora took the bus home. Lanzan sat in her seat for the full ride and turned the distinction over. What he's hiding versus what he's afraid of. She thought she was beginning to understand the difference. He came in at 6:30. She was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her jacket still on. She'd been home 30 minutes and hadn't moved to start dinner. She'd just been waiting. He read the room. He set his keys on the hook and stood near the doorway, with his arms at his sides, not defensive but ready. "Who are you?" she said. It wasn't a loud question. It was a real one. He was quiet for several seconds. She told him what she knew. The corporate counsel who specialized in mergers and acquisitions, the suited associate who'd come to the house and gone rigid when he saw her, who treated Daniel the way you treat someone who signs things, the safety inspection report. Project owner, D. Mercer, Mercer Capital and Construction. What she'd found online, the $400 million development fund, the leadership page, the headshot with the title. Chief Executive Officer, she said. He was still. "I had a business degree and $34, and you watched me apply for 31 jobs without saying a word," she said. "You watched me figure out the bus routes. You listened when I explained to you what I was earning, and how I was planning to cover my share of the expenses." She stopped. She pulled in a breath. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of what, exactly?" He was quiet again. This time the silence was different, not evasion, but something genuine working its way to the surface. That if you knew before you had anything of your own, you'd never know if you stayed because you wanted to. She looked at him for a long moment. "And what exactly am I supposed to do with that?" she said. He didn't have an answer. He looked like a man who had one prepared and had recognized at the moment of delivery that it wasn't going to hold. She went to her room. She closed the door, not hard, just closed. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor. She wasn't sure what she felt. It wasn't the clean, directional feeling of betrayal, which had a shape she could work with. It was something more complicated, the recognition that she'd been cared for and tested at the same time, by someone who thought those were the same thing, that his fear had been real, that her ignorance had also been real, that both of those things were true and neither canceled the other. She sat there for a long time. She was still sitting there when she heard the mail slot in the front door. She heard Daniel go to get it. She heard him in the hallway for a moment, then his footsteps stopped. She got up and opened her door. He was standing in the entry holding a formal envelope. She could read the return address from where she stood. Mercer Capital and Construction Annual Leadership Gala. The envelope was addressed to Daniel Mercer, CEO. He looked up and found her looking at him from the hallway. Neither of them said anything. She went back to her room and sat back down on the bed. She had her answer. The question now was what she was going to do with it. He asked her to come with him to the gala. Not as a request with conditions, not as an explanation, just a question. She said yes. He didn't say thank you. She didn't ask for more context than he offered, which was, "It's a company event, Tuesday evening, about 2 hours." She said she understood. She wore the best dress she owned, which was the gray one she'd brought in her bag from the church. It was appropriate, and she knew it, and she didn't ask him whether it was appropriate. She was done waiting to be qualified by other people's standards. He came downstairs in a suit she hadn't seen before. Not flashy, not trying to establish anything, just a suit that fit correctly and was made from fabric that had a different quality than what she associated with his daily life. He said she looked nice. She said he did too. They drove in his truck. She knew something was different when they turned into the venue district. The hotel the gala was at had an awning that extended to the curb and a valet line that moved in the quiet, practiced way that indicated this was not a brand new operation. Daniel handed the keys to the valet without the slight self-consciousness most people have when someone else takes their car. She noticed that. She noticed that he moved through the entrance the same way, without the small adjustment that people make when they enter a room where they feel they need to perform belonging. He belonged. She understood that before the doors were fully open. The room was a ballroom in the way that word implies history, not just a large open space, but one that had hosted 300 people many times before. The crowd was a mix of ages, mostly professional, mostly well-dressed without being formal. Daniel was recognized within 30 seconds of entering. Not conspicuously, nobody ran up to him. But the room shifted. Space opened. A few nods, quiet acknowledgments. The particular awareness that moves through a room when the person who owns the meeting walks in. She stayed at his side. She watched everything. She saw Helen Crane across the room 20 minutes later. Helen was with a group near the bar. She was a vendor contact, Cora registered, here for the account relationship side, not as a guest. Helen saw Cora at almost the same moment Cora saw her. The expression that crossed Helen's face was not hostility. It was something colder, recognition of a calculation gone wrong. Cora said nothing. She turned back to the room. The program began at 7:30. The MC, a man in his 50s with the easy timing of someone who'd done this for years, opened with remarks about the company's performance, a few acknowledgments, and then, calmly, "It's my great pleasure to welcome the CEO of Mercer Capital and Construction, Daniel Mercer, whose company this year delivered." The rest became noise. Not the noise of the room, which continued normally, applause. The MC completing his sentence, Daniel stepping forward to accept the recognition. The noise in Cora's head, which was quieter and more total. 800 million in annual revenue. A portfolio across 7 states. Flagship development projects. The company she had heard referenced in snippets for months. The capital position, the city council vote, the liability exposure. This was it. The entire shape of what she hadn't known arranged itself in the space of about 30 seconds. She applauded. She stood next to his table during the reception that followed and spoke when spoken to, and she did not let anything show. She had practice with that. She spoke to no one from Mercer Capital and Construction about anything beyond pleasantries. She did not perform the role of the newly discovered wife. She was simply present. When they left, she was quiet in the truck. At home, he asked if she wanted tea. She said no. She went upstairs and sat in her room and looked at the window for a while. The housing pitch. She had stayed up until past 11 building that analysis because she thought it mattered and nobody was going to do it if she didn't. She had taken the bus because $34 was $34, and she was managing her share. She had sat across from him at the kitchen table and told him, in the way you tell someone who is managing the same constraints to are, what she was earning and what she could cover. She had eaten the pasta he made and appreciated it because it was what they had. She had done all of that while he knew. Not as cruelty, she understood that. But knowing. There was a thing he could have said at any point. He could have said, "You don't need to count the bus money." He could have said, "Your work has value. I know the people you're working for. I can make a call." He could have said any number of things that would have changed the texture of the past months. He didn't say any of them, and she understood that his reason was not nothing. She had heard him in the kitchen the night before. "I was afraid that if you knew before you had anything of your own, you'd never know if you stayed because you wanted to." She understood the fear. She even understood the logic of it, but she had been counting money while he already knew the answer, and that was a thing you couldn't unfeel. She packed a bag carefully and efficiently. Not everything, just what she needed. She did not write a note. She was not disappearing. She was getting some space, and leaving was not the same as disappearing. She came downstairs at 11 o'clock. He was in the living room, still in his suit jacket, one button undone, sitting with the quiet of someone who had been waiting. He looked at her bag. She opened the front door. She did not slam it. She stepped through and closed it behind her gently, and then she walked to the corner and called a car, and she waited under the streetlight in her gray dress and her gray blazer. And when the car came, she got in and rode to James's apartment. Her colleague, who had offered 2 weeks ago, offhandedly, that he had a couch if she ever needed one. She texted him from the car. He had the door unlocked by the time she arrived. She set her bag in the corner of the spare room and sat on the couch and said nothing for a while. "Work?" James asked. "Adjacent," she said. He made tea. She didn't cry. She didn't know what she felt exactly, except that it had edges and it was hers and she was going to sit with it until it made sense. That was enough for tonight. James's couch was fine. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, and he wasn't home most of the day, which gave her the quiet she needed to think. She stayed 2 weeks. She paid him for the use of the space, which he accepted without making a thing of it, and she brought her laptop and worked from the kitchen table and took long walks in the evenings when the thinking got too circular. Gerald called on the 5th day. She declined the call. He sent a follow-up text that was warm in a calculated way. He'd heard things were complicated. He wanted her to know the offer still stood. He thought she deserved better than this. She deleted the message and blocked the number. Patricia called on the 7th day. She let it go to voicemail and did not listen to the voicemail for 4 more days, by which time she already knew what it would say. When she finally listened, it was exactly what she'd expected. A rehearsed version of concern that was really about Patricia's own exposure, her own discomfort, the situation Patricia found herself in now that the Ashby arrangement had collapsed. Cora did not call back. At Aldridge, 3 things happened in quick succession. The first was that Helen Crane was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. The nature of the review was not disclosed to the broader team. But Diane from HR stopped by Cora's desk to let her know that the complaint against Cora had been formally dismissed. Cora thanked her and went back to work. The second was that the account director called Cora into a meeting and told her she was being offered the lead analyst role, a promotion that brought with it her own accounts and a salary adjustment that landed at a number she had to keep a neutral expression about. She took it. The third happened a week after that. The Housing Coalition came in as a real commission, a major contract, the kind that required a lead analyst who understood the problem from the ground up. The account director said the client had specifically requested the analyst, who built the original transport integration model. Cora read the brief and started building the pitch. She was 2 days into it when a colleague, not James, someone from the adjacent team, mentioned offhandedly that the development partner on the Housing Coalition contract was a firm called Mercer Capital and Construction. She went still for a moment. Then she said, "Good to know," and kept working. She did not recuse herself. She did not flag it to anyone. She had won the account on her own merits before she knew who the development partner was, and she was going to deliver on it the same way. If there was a conflict of interest to be evaluated, the evaluation would happen with the actual facts on the table. She would keep a record of everything. James told her, toward the end of her 2nd week, that he'd spoken to someone who knew the Aldridge hiring process. The company had a flag system in their HR software for reviewing candidates with personal connections to client companies. The flag on Cora's application had been cleared. No connection identified. Daniel's company hadn't appeared in any part of the review. She hadn't asked Daniel to stay out of it. He had stayed out of it anyway. She filed that. Eleanor called on a Saturday and asked if she'd meet her for coffee. Cora said yes. They sat in a small place near the park, and Eleanor didn't waste the first 15 minutes on pleasantries. She said she'd spoken to Daniel that week. She said that speaking to Daniel after something had gone wrong was often like speaking to a wall that felt bad about being a wall. He didn't use the word fear, Eleanor said. He used consideration. He said he was trying to be considerate. She looked at Cora over her cup. "I have been trying to explain to him for 3 days that consideration and control are different things." Cora said, "Did he listen?" "He's thinking about it," Eleanor said, "which is progress for him." Eleanor told her about a woman named Rachel, someone Daniel had been with before, several years back. He had told Rachel who he was early, because he was younger and had not yet learned to be afraid of it. Rachel left him the week she found out the full scope, repositioned herself, and filed a claim alleging a verbal engagement contract. The settlement had taken 18 months and had cost him considerably more than the money. "He didn't tell you because he was trying to protect himself," Eleanor said. "He thought he was also protecting you. He thought those were the same thing." She set down her cup. "They aren't." "No," Cora said. "They aren't." Gerald's attorney filed a brief 2 weeks later, claiming the marriage had been entered under duress and requesting a judicial declaration of invalidity. Cora read the filing and then called the family law attorney she'd hired with her own paycheck, the first real professional fee she'd paid since the promotion. Her attorney reviewed the filing. The marriage was valid. The duress claim had no evidentiary support. The brief was dismissed in 11 days. Cora read the dismissal notice and set it on her desk and went back to the Housing Coalition pitch. She was in the office late, building the final recommendation deck, when her desk phone rang. The front desk said there was someone in the lobby asking for her. No appointment. She went down. Daniel was in the lobby. He was in the same kind of clothes he'd worn at the construction site. Not work clothes, but the casual version of himself. He wasn't holding flowers. He wasn't doing anything theatrical, and when she came across an envelope in his hand, he held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Separation papers," he said. "Already prepared. Already reviewed." He paused. "I'm not asking you to sign them. I'm not asking you to come back. He stopped. Started again. "The decision is yours. It always should have been." She looked at the envelope for a moment. "We should talk," she said. "I know." "Not tonight," she said. "I have to finish something." He nodded once. "I'll be in the lobby," he said. She went back upstairs and sat at her desk and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she opened the recommendation deck and finished what she'd come to finish. It took 45 minutes. When it was done and sent, she closed her laptop, gathered her things, and went back downstairs. He was still in the lobby. She told him there was a coffee place open on the corner and asked if he wanted to walk. He said yes. They walked. The coffee place was quiet at that hour. 2 people in the corner with laptops, a man reading a newspaper at the bar. They took a table near the window and ordered without looking at the menu. The envelope sat on the table between them. She asked him about Rachel. He didn't ask how she knew. He told her. He was 31 when it happened. He'd told Rachel early because he hadn't yet learned to be afraid of it. She'd been warm and she'd been funny, and she'd been gone within 6 days of finding out the full scope. And then 18 months later there was a filing and a settlement, and a different kind of understanding of what it meant to let someone know who you were before you understood who they were. "So you built a test," Cora said. He looked at the table. "I didn't plan it that way, but that's what it was." "Yes," he said, "that's what it was." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the street was mostly empty. A single car moved through the intersection. She watched it pass. "You were afraid," she said. "I understand afraid," she turned back to him. "But I ran out the side door of a church because I was afraid. I didn't build a version of myself designed to be tested." He didn't say anything. He was not a man who filled silences with words that didn't have weight behind them, which was something she had come to appreciate and was now finding difficult to argue against. "The worst part," she said, "isn't that you didn't tell me. It's that I started to trust you before I knew, and then I found out that you were watching me from behind something I couldn't see." She paused. "I don't know what to do with that." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "I've been thinking about almost nothing else for 3 weeks," he said. "I watched you build a life from nothing because I thought that was the kindest thing I could do. I convinced myself that if you chose to stay when you didn't need to, it would be real. What I didn't account for was what I was doing to you in the process." She looked at him. "What you were doing to me," she said, "was making me live smaller than I needed to, while you already knew I didn't have to." He accepted that without defending it. She looked at the envelope. She turned it over once on the table. "Eleanor told me what you're afraid of," she said. "She also told me what she thinks you should be afraid of." She pushed the envelope back across the table toward him. "I'm not signing those." He looked at the envelope, then at her. "But I'm not coming back tonight either," she said. "I need to finish something first. I need to know what it looks like to do this on my own." "Not because you're not," she stopped. Found the right words. "Not because I don't believe you. Because I need to believe myself," he nodded. Something settled in him, she could see it, the way a long-held tension releases. Not relief exactly, more like acceptance, like a man putting down something he'd been carrying wrong. "No lawyers ahead of your decisions," he said. "No money used to solve disagreements. No more," he paused. "Privacy." "That word," she said. "I know. Don't use it again. I won't." She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They sat there for a while without having to say anything more. 6 months later, she walked into a boardroom on a Tuesday morning and ran a pitch presentation for 45 minutes. The room was a mixed group: city housing officials, coalition representatives, 2 bank contacts. The development partner was there as well, on the far side of the table. She hadn't looked at the attendee list closely. She'd been preparing the presentation. Across the table on the development partner side, Daniel sat with 2 members of his team. He had a notepad in front of him. He was the same as he always was, present, unhurried, not taking up more room than he needed. She registered his presence in the first 10 seconds and then went back to the room. She had a presentation to run. She ran it. The Housing Coalition lead asked 3 hard questions. She had answers for all 3 because she'd thought of them 2 days ago and built the responses into the deck. The bank contacts asked about the financial model. She walked them through it. Daniel's team asked nothing. Daniel himself said nothing. He sat and listened. The meeting ended. People gathered their things. She answered 2 follow-up questions at the door. When she turned back, the room had mostly cleared. Daniel was still at the table, reviewing something in his notepad. He looked up. "Good presentation," he said. "You saw the original analysis," she said, "from when it was a departmental initiative that I built overnight. I heard it referenced," he said. "I didn't know it was yours until later." "I know," she said. She picked up her bag. She held her laptop under one arm. She walked toward the door. She stopped. "Parking garage," she said, without turning around. 5 minutes, she walked out. In the parking garage, she stood next to her car, the one she'd bought herself 4 months ago with the first real paycheck from her new role, and waited. "He appeared in 3 minutes. I keep my word," she said. "Always?" he asked. She opened the passenger door. He got in. She got in the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled out of the garage. She didn't go anywhere particular. She just drove through the city in the early afternoon light, and he sat in the passenger seat of her car and didn't say anything, and neither did she, and it was enough. More than enough. If this story reminded you that real love asks for honesty, not performance, drop a comment and tell me what you thought. We'll be back with more stories that stay with you. In the years that followed, people in Hollow Pine grew accustomed to the sight of 2 women at Renner's Landing, one who could not speak, and one who had finally learned to listen. They worked together through the seasons in the wordless partnership they had built, each knowing what the other needed without being told. The way people who have worked closely for a long time learn to move around each other without collision. There was no ceremony to how it happened. It was simply the daily practice of a place that asked to be kept. There were hard years. The kind of work the landing asked for does not get easier with telling. There was a spring the river came up higher than anyone living had seen it, higher than the old flood marks painted on the boathouse wall, higher than the line Silas had marked in the ledger in 1972 with a notation about the big water. The lower dock went under in one night, and 3 of the life rings went with it, and the current took a section of the bank that Silas had reinforced with river stones 40 years ago, as if it had been waiting all that time to reclaim it. Wren would not come in until she was sure no one was out in the water. She stood at the edge of the landing in the rain for hours, watching, one hand on the lamppost, until the water receded enough that she could be certain. And there was a winter a boy went under at the old eddy, the same eddy Silas had pulled the Pruitt boy from in 1981, and this time was different. He went down in the afternoon when the light was wrong, and the current was high from the Weesk rain. Della heard about it that evening. She drove to the family's house. She sat with the mother for 2 hours and said almost nothing, which was what the woman needed. That night she went to the ledger. She took the pen. She wrote the boy's name in the same careful way Silas had written the 7 entries that ended with the word lost, not because it made anything better, but because to leave it out would have been a second drowning, and Silas Renner had not let the river have anyone twice, and she would not either. She had learned what those 7 entries had cost him, those 7 times the word went down in his careful square hand. She had understood it abstractly from the ledgers. Now she understood it another way. She went to the funeral. She kept the lamp lit that night as she kept it every night, because the night the lamp is dark is the night you cannot forgive yourself. But there were more of the other kind, and those were the ones that kept the record worth keeping. Young Silas Pruitt, Dale's boy, who had grown from the quiet teenager who'd helped with the dock framing into a strong, serious man, came down regularly. He had learned to swim at the landing in the safe bend above the old eddy, where the current ran shallow and slow. He had learned to read the water, from Wren, who had learned it from Silas, and the knowledge had passed through them the way the river passes through the same channel year after year. One flood night in early April, he swam out twice into water no sensible person would enter. The first time he brought back a woman who had been swept from the low crossing. The second time he went back for someone else, and came back alone. The water was too fast and too cold, and the dark was too deep, and he had to come back without them. He came into the boathouse soaking and shaking and sat at the table where Della was waiting. She pushed the ledger toward him. He took the pen with a hand too unsteady to keep a line straight and wrote two names, the one he had saved and the one he had not. Della did not correct the crooked letters or the unsteady line. "That's the truest line in the book," she told him. Lacey's daughter Renee had begun coming to the landing when she was old enough to be useful, a girl of 18 when she started, serious as faced and quick with her hands, who learned to sew life rings from Wren and Della the way Della had learned to sew everything. By watching carefully, by doing it wrong the first time, and by understanding that the quality of the work was not about showing off but about whether it held when it was needed. The set of rings Renee finished in her second year were so well made that Della kept one hanging on the boathouse wall, the way another woman might frame a diploma. She didn't tell Renee that. She just left it there, where Renee could see it when she worked. 3 women of 3 generations sat mending life rings under the storm lantern. Through the autumn afternoons, Della, Wren, and Renee, the needle going up and down in a silence that was not empty but full, the way the landing itself had always been full of something that didn't have a name. The landing an appraiser had recorded as worth 0 became a place the whole town came to, not to buy or sell anything, but only to belong to something larger than themselves. People left things on the post the way they had left quarters on Silas's grave. A jar of preserves, a coil of good rope, a child's drawing of a boat and a lamp, taped to the wood with electrical tape that came loose in the rain and had to be replaced, and was replaced because the drawing was the kind of thing you replace rather than throw away. No one organized any of this. It simply happened the way water finds the low place, the way kindness, once it is shown where the channel runs, keeps running there. Della Renner lived many more years beside that river. When she was old and her hands could no longer row, she sat at the edge of the landing in the afternoons and watched Wren carry people across. Wren had become what Silas had always been, the person the river knew, the person who understood its moods and its dangers and its particular kindnesses. She had grown into the landing, the way a tree grows into the bank, her roots so deep and so old that the bank had shaped itself around her. Wren taught others, as she herself had been taught. She taught with her hands, not with words, which had always been the best way to teach the things that mattered. The knowledge passed from person to person like the current passes downstream, changing shape with the terrain but never stopping. The account that had once held only 164 never grew rich. Della was never rich. But she had come to understand, in the long years of keeping the record, something that the man in the polished black pickup would never understand. A legacy is not what we own. A piece of land can be appraised at 0. A ferry landing can rot. A bank account can drain down to loose change. But there are things no appraiser can measure, no power of condemnation can take, no number can buy. A name written down so it will not be forgotten. A hand reached out in the dark. A lamp lit every night for a stranger you will never meet. Silas Renner had left his wife a river and a set of ledgers full of people's names. It had taken his death for her to finally read them. But once she had read them, she had never stopped. And that, in the end, is all that kindness asks of us. Not wealth, not thanks. Only that we keep a place on the page for the next name. Only that we keep the lamp burning. Keep the lamp lit. No one crosses alone. If this story stayed with you, if you think Silas measured things the right way, tell us in the comments. And if you know someone who lights a lamp for others without asking for anything in return, this one is for them.